Hello and welcome to Hemp TV. I'm your host, Kevin Jones, and I've got a special guest here, Stephen Oliver from the Canna-Consultants. How are you, sir?
Very good. Really pleased to be on here, Kevin, and looking forward to having an open chat with you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. Now, forgive me, got to go for the glasses straight away because you've had quite an interesting life, sir. Now, you got into the cannabinoid industry in 2016. That's roughly about the time that I got in, but we went different paths, pretty sir. But before that, you were a former HM Customs and Excise officer, where you became a civil service accredited teacher and trainer and received commendations for bravery in undercover work. Wow. First and foremost, you also assumed various legal roles on behalf of HMRC and spent 6 years as an investigator until 2000. You then worked for KPMG as a producer start that one again. You also worked for KPMG
European
as
Environment Law Team.
Pardon?
European Environment Law Team. It's much easier than saying then the producer responsibilities, such as waste, electronic energy, packaging waste, that type of thing.
It's a noble sector as well, and you had some notable clients that included Sony, Harley-Davidson and Booker. I would mention the football team, but they seem to be doing a little bit better than Liverpool at the moment, so no, I'll say it, Man United. You studied for a degree in that time where you received 14 subject prizes whilst an undergraduate, and that then led to you winning the Academy Prize and Quantum LLP Prize in 2010. You then worked as a lecturer for undergraduates and postgraduates in business law and sorry, I almost said entertainment law there, sorry, employment law, contract law, and European law. In 2011, you also became a member of the National Association of Licensed Paralegals. You are also married to Elaine, who you occasionally call Mrs. O, and you like fossil hunting with the grandkids. And amongst that, you still find time to maintain that awesome beard. Busy life, sir.
Yeah. I mean, I like to think that I've got about 25 years experience in EU law. The thing about novel foods, when people question it, European law is fairly complex. But as you said, I taught it before that. When I headed up the European environment team for KPMG, it was with regard to the environment. So I was fortunate enough to go to Washington in 2001 and worked alongside Karl-Heinz Florenz, who was at the time in charge of environment law with the European Union. I worked with the Environment Agency and led to the amendment of one of the producer responsibility statutory instruments. So I like to think I know my way around European law and then the subsequent application into food law. I mean, not boring people there. I've had 2 food businesses myself, Manchester United, Newcastle United as well, which really smart's coming as a Sunderland fan. And I think then from the cannabis perspective, the experience goes back to having my first joint at 14, then not smoking cannabis, joining Customs and Excise, operating in the magistrates' courts and representing the Crown at that stage, progressed through that, came back to cannabinoids when my mother was passing away with Alzheimer's, and I've been involved in 2 CBD businesses prior to 2017. I had a food business, which was one of the first using modified atmosphere packaging for fresh ready meals. And I have a partner who is a 26-year member of the bar in the UK. So I think we're probably quite well qualified. We don't know everything. With regard to novel foods, and rightly so, people question, who is this? Who's speaking about this? Well, as a firm, we've made 24 applications, novel food applications for CBD across both the European Union and the UK. We've had 4 Article 4 submissions, and we've got 3 non-CBD applications. So we also operate post-transparency rules. So as most people will know, the rules for the EFSA have dramatically changed in the last 18 months. So making an application before the FSA's deadline and mirroring that with the FSA was a simple system, if I can say that, considering what we have in place now. And I fully expect the UK, once they have the digital infrastructure, to incorporate that. So yeah, I hope I can add some value. I hope people find what we say interesting. I'm always open to debate, but I would suggest that we've been on a massively steep trajectory. There are consultants or experts in food law, and we've engaged and learned from them. Nobody knows everything in this industry. Anybody that tells you they do is lying.
About your help in the industry, because it is help. I mean, you're a consultancy service. You could very easily represent and kind of focus on your clients, but actually you've been about for a bit. You know, you're a recognized keynote speaker. You're always there, willing to ask the tough questions in the road that we have traveled in novel foods. Is that something that you've put yourself forward, or is that something that well, yeah, talk to me about that.
I mean, part of its character. Matt and I are very similar, where, you know, believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. The biggest problems in this industry, which led to the consultancy, was the misinformation, the peddlers of myths. So people in positions of responsibility. Unfortunately, some of those are you know, dissipating now. But telling people and selling information, which was, you know, incorrect. The earliest one for me was that you can have 0.2% in these CBD products. You know, we challenged the lawyer at the time and said, "Fantastic. Here's counsel's advice on why that's wrong. And are you prepared to provide pro bono assistance to any of your clients that find that your advice is incorrect?" And we've looked at trade associations. We've attended the inaugural meeting for the ACI. We looked at the CIC. We've spoken to IA. Was a long time ago, and we've spoken to the CTA. But I think some people like to be at the table and think they can affect change there. Our position is that we like to be outside of the table, so that we are not bound by any relationship. We don't talk about clients openly. So you won't find us citing our clients on our social media or on our website. We maintain that level of confidentiality for them. We are very vocal in challenging what we consider to be bad practice. We're very vocal in challenging misinformation, and I think it serves us well. It began, I suppose, if you don't know where it happened, Kevin, was when certain people started to put information that was key for an industry that was crying out for information behind a paywall. And we thought that charging people to listen to the regulator or charging people to listen to experts was just the wrong way. So what we chose to do was at every opportunity challenge that and provide what we consider to be the best and the highest quality information that we could, free to all. Now, from a business perspective, at the time, that may not have seemed the best way to move forward, but I think it's engendered trust and a respect from industry participants.
I think you're right. In fact, the first time I came across you and Matt was on a 2020 webinar with Paul Tossell, the head of Novel Foods.
Yeah.
We didn't have much kind of information then, and I kind of remember Paul Tossell not being concrete on some of his replies, but then, to be fair to him, I think it was an evolving process at that time. But certainly, I recognised there and then that you were, you know, you offered a free webinar that anyone was able to jump on, and on top of that, yeah, you seem to be more concerned about the transparency for the industry over a select few, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think there was a danger of certain people capitalizing on information and then seeking to monetize it. What is clear is the law should be clear, open to all. So when you have a situation where regulatory individuals are engaging with, whether it be trade associations, private companies, that information must be shared. And what was important, and I think in fairness to Paul Tossell at that time, he didn't have the answer to all the questions. And what our webinar allowed people to see was just that, because there were certain people that were presenting information as a fait accompli, telling people this is how it must be done. And there were gaps, you know, there were gaps about animal testing, there were gaps about what was required and what their approach would be. And I think history has been kind to us in that if you look back, you know, our mantra, corny as it is be careful who you listen to. And I think we've, at times where it's been difficult to give bad news, we have given that bad news, and that's important for the industry, because if you're going to make business decisions which can lead to the loss of employment for people, and there are people who pay mortgages, or people that I saw remortgaging their houses to enter into the CBD industry with little or no advice apart from, you know, this nonsense that was about. It's very, very important to give them the facts. Now, high risk industry, if you want to enter, that's great, but you need to know where the lines are.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I've obviously kind of done a bit of advising myself, but there's a big, big difference between the Hemp Agency, which is advisory, and of course yourself, where you are accredited. And certainly when it comes to those decisions, I would say that it's probably better to talk to someone like yourself than to me, who can give advice, but you should always kind of double check, you know, unless you know the person that you're talking to has the accreditation, the knowledge and experience to be able to back up a sensible direction.
Yeah, no, I disagree with you, Kevin. I think it's about honesty. I always use this phrase about asking your mum to mark your homework, which is true. A lot of people want to hear the positive, and I think the responsibility you have when you are a paid advisor is to tell people the news that they don't want to necessarily hear. And often that can lead to the termination of an engagement, because we'll be faced with a situation where somebody has engaged you to assist them and provide advice, and then you sit down with a person who's actually going to write that check or look to spend other people's money. And the question is, would you invest yourself? And what we pride ourselves on is the ability to say, no, this project won't work, or the figures aren't right, or the regulatory framework's not there. And, you know, that leads to the termination of a relationship. But we have quite a lot of boomerang clients. We have quite a lot of people that come back to us because they respect that. And I think the same goes for yourself. You know, a lot of the work that you're doing could alienate yourself from certain elements of the industry, certainly the regulatory, because you're telling the truth. And again, I think time is going to be very kind to you. And yeah, we are different. But I think probably the services you provide to your clients are complementary.
Bless you, sir. Oh, that's nice to hear from someone as esteemed as yourself. Now, I've asked you here because, as it goes, little over a year ago, I'd started on that journey of questioning bits and pieces, and like you, I felt a little bit frustrated going direct to people to ask questions behind closed doors, and yeah, it's moved into an interesting world where one vagueness is transplanted with another, I think. Now, in that article, which was the first one, called Novel Thoughts, I presented a series of questions that I relayed from the industry, not just from listening to you, but obviously business owners and the likes of, and, you know, the things that I couldn't get right in my head, there are some things that I think we could talk about now, because there has been a lot of movement of sorts, but certainly, like I said, one transparency issue kind of gets planted or replaced by another one. So I want to bring up some of those questions, and one or two of them I think are very close to your heart. And the first one is in regards to animal testing. Now, just to give you a kind of level on this, now you're very word focused, so I have to be careful here of kind of, you know, recognizing what is my own suspicion versus an opinion versus the facts that are available there. So I think you and yourself would be the perfect person to kind of give feedback on these, just so you know, your average person kind of understands the deal. So, animal testing, do you think there was any need for this? I'm going to just leave it that open for you.
Okay, it's a broad question, Kevin. So we raised this with the Food Standards Agency, with the EFSA, and with the FDA, because our position has not changed, and our position is that the available data, whilst the majority of it was generated by GW to justify opinion lectures and medicine, the available data there was sufficient to show that in the suggested daily ingested rates for CBD as a supplement, there was no requirement for further toxicological work. Now, along with Develorex, who are probably the most esteemed firm dealing with both pharmacology and toxicology and chemistry, well, we engaged them to conduct an analysis of all the available data. And with the greatest respect, they have far more qualifications than anybody sitting on the COT or anybody sitting in the advisory committees with regard to the EFSA. And that's borne out by the fact that they're invited by the EMA and the FDA to provide expert advice. Nevertheless, we were told that wouldn't be acceptable. So we pointedly asked, and it's on video, whether or not the FSA demanded required animal testing, and both the FSA, the FDA, and the EFSA all say they do not require mandatory testing. However, what is absolutely apparent is that if you do not conduct animal testing, you will not get validated with regard to CBD. So that begs a number of questions. We have systematically been trying to reduce the amount of animal testing, not only in food, but in cosmetics for the last 20 years, and rightly so. There is justification for animal testing in medicines. And
hold on a second, mate. Sprocket. Can you animal testing, and he's got a whine. Go on, go settle down. Oh, he's looking at me all blank. Bless him. Sorry about that.
He's got to sleep with me talking, Kevin. So there is justification for animal testing. Absolutely there is. But we have all of these reduction programs. Do I think there was justification for CBD? No, I don't. But the novel food process is such that there's a three-tiered approach, and they're looking at consumer safety. So they have in place, the requirement for a number of tests, both in vitro and in vivo. And we have this OECD 408 study, which is a 90-day force-fed. So you've got a Wistar rat, force-fed, and then you have a necropsy, so the animal's killed at the end of 90 days. There's observations through that, and then you would then have another group, which would be the recovery group, for a further 30 days, where they were no longer force-fed, and you'd then examine the organs of all of them. Now, it's evidently clear that in very large quantities of CBD, there are some issues. So there are issues gastrointestinal, there are issues with liver, and there are reproductive issues. But none of those in competent studies appear anywhere near the levels that we're talking about in the food. So it's very, very disingenuous for the FSA to say that they would not accept data used in clinical trials for a medical device or for a medicine when there's a risk versus reward study. So I hold the FSA responsible for instructing animal testing. Now, what we need to look on the next point is what should happen is there is a single trial. So are we looking at CBD? And the industry has an element of blame here because they never questioned this. And when we put our paper out, it was met with silence because people don't want to admit that the products that they sell, which are vegan and animal and cruelty-free, are actually associated so closely. There's an analogy at the moment, particularly in the States, with these new meat-free burgers and products. So one of the brands in the States is selling its product to reduce animal cruelty, but all of their work on developing their bloody burger involved animal testing. So there's a perverse oxymoron here. So yeah, if they insisted, we have one study, but the way the industry was at that time, people were trying to monetize this. So you had people, one industry group going, "Oh, we can get money by having a study." Another one, we'll do a better study. We'll do 2 studies. And then you had some individual companies that went away and conducted their own studies. You had some companies that had already conducted the studies. So a precedent had already been set, to be honest, because 2019 we'd already had these studies. In my general sphere, I'm aware of 17 separate studies that have been conducted in the UK by UK companies. So 17 studies that have gone into the FSA, and they've been conducted as far afield as Florida, Czech Republic, or in the UK. There's 14 I'm aware of on the US side, so that's 31. I'm aware of 9 animal studies that are being conducted by pharmaceutical companies, and I haven't even included the Epidiolex ones there. So I think is that 40. So if you look at an average of somewhere in the region of, well, let's say 45, somewhere in the region of 200 Wistar rats for each of those studies, that's 9,000 rats. So in my mind, that's 44 more studies than we needed. And I'm also aware, and people, you only have to look at LinkedIn. There was one bunch of idiots who are no longer here, thank God, who 2 years ago were saying we've conducted studies in 9 species. So I'm aware of people conducting these studies outside of rats. Different animals have closer relationship to humans. None of the efficacy in this is very good, because there's an ability to do this type of study on human cells. It's just these laboratories are quite centered, and the number of people conducting these studies is quite small. So they tend to have this center of excellence, and it really inhibits the ability for people to use these alternative non-animal studies. But that be said, I've seen people trying to kill chimpanzees in Florida with THC. I've talked about this before: horses, rabbits, cows. So you remember the beagles. The respiratory system and the reproductive system, to similar in different animals, is more akin to humans. So we've got this ridiculous situation where we've gone through all of this, and now we have the EFSA who have stopped because it's not sufficient information. And they knew that then, because they're moving the bar so high that they're never going to be happy. And to my mind, what they're now asking us to do is conduct unethical, unlawful studies in humans. Because if you look at their safety on cannabidiol, what they're saying is we want to know the source of the diarrhea. I mean, to my mind, I think there are three causes. You can't induce diarrhea in a human. You've got drug-drug interaction. They want to know more about that. What are we going to do? Take somebody who's already has a pre-existing medical condition and try and induce an adverse effect? Nonsense. Long-term effects, I get that. We can do that. And we're working quite hard to try and find solutions. But was there justification for animal studies? No. Did the data exist? Yes. Could there have been a single study? Yes, there could. Have there been at least 40 to 45 studies that are replicate studies? Yes. We've got the 3 R's, and the main one is, replicate, reduce, replicate testing, refine. It's an absolute abomination, and we'll look back with shame, I think, that we just capitulated, and some of us followed. So yeah, I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, I don't think it's a necessary tactic myself. I mean, I find it hard to kind of understand in layman's terms how force feeding a rat and seeing the impact that CBD has on the liver can then translate to how it would affect on humans. I mean, from my understanding, it's being force fed in that format can involve up to being given a quarter of your body weight of CBD isolate. Now, if that's true,
yeah, I don't think that happens, Kevin. I mean, I'm not defending it, but I mean, essentially, what the purpose of these trials, I'll try to make it as simple as possible, is you'll remember the human trial where we had a number of fatalities, and what we're looking at is we're trying to go to the lowest level and establish at the earliest possible stage whether or not something is going to have a toxic effect on the body. So it could cause heart failure, liver failure, and what you would find is that if you fed an unknown substance or a substance that wasn't on the market. So let's say you and I invented a brand new substance. We'll call it CNS. And you and I think this is going to be the best new food since sliced bread. So we put it in the rats, and all the rats drop down dead. Well, we know that we need then to do a little bit more work. If we put it into the rodents and nothing happens at all, and we do the other types of tests, then the likelihood is that there aren't going to be unique adverse effects in humans if none are detected in animals. So you start at the lowest denomination, and then you would progress. So we do know, and this is what swayed the regulators because of GW's work, that over a prolonged period of time, with exceptionally large doses of CBD isolate, there was an increase in liver, there was a decrease in testes, and there were a number of other adverse effects. But what we also know, and I think, again, I use this with disingenuous, we also know if you actually do crunch the data and look at it and see what's available, that they happen at such high levels, when we're talking about 70 milligrams a day, or I would say 230 milligrams a day in an adult, that there are certain caveats we can apply. There isn't sufficient information about pregnant and lactating persons, and that's because they're a very difficult study group to take risk with. There clearly is the potential for some drug-drug interaction, as there are with lots of supplements and foods. You know, grapefruit is a good example. Eggs. There are probably not allergenicity issues with CBD as an isolate, but it would have been easy to adopt the very early type of precautions that you yourself were explaining and championing to people about. Speaking to your doctor, don't use with other medications. So I think we could have mitigated all of that. But I understand the process they have. It's not unique to CBD. These trials are being conducted on lots of other foods and extracts. The difference being, they tend not to be multiple studies by multiple different companies, and you can see that from the vitamin D2 mushroom powder issue at the moment. And there also isn't this database of available evidence, because novel foods process is designed for something that's new. So it's not been widely consumed. So it's novel. If it's novel, you don't know anything about it. And then that type of safety concern is justified. CBD, whether it was combusted or swallowed, I don't care which cannabinoid you're talking about. I think you can take a pragmatic approach and say there is not a history of accident and emergency being full of people who have smoked a joint with a physical, adverse effect. Coupled with that, when we have such a large group of people who are using it as a supplement, discounting the fact as to whether or not the products made are actually to the standard that they proclaim to be. But we then have the body of data, and we have a Pedialex, which is a 98% isolated CBD, with a bit of strawberry carrier oil, and we've got all of that data. And as I'm sure we'll come on to, there have been some very, very influential academics from some of our institutions in this country that have been involved in that research for a number of years. So to say that we're starting from position zero, I use that word again, is disingenuous. And I think it's worse than that, which is why I often read with a wry grin on my face when you start to peel back the areas of the onion that is the regulation of CBD, Kevin.
Wow, far be it for me to say it's becoming a hobby, but I feel like I've written more than I should do. Now, you mentioned Epidiolex there. Now, I came across a web page recently that suggested that whilst their products are tested on animals, they also have an animal product R&D section. Is this anything that you kind of want to touch on a little bit? Because that feels like to me that it's coming back to the point that you're saying. Is there a need for these toxicology tests? If it's different formats, if it's like Epidiolex being used for condition X and Y on a pet, do you think there definitely is then no need for those tests to carry through? Because I mean, at the end of the day, yes, it's about the impact, but if the side effects are already known, then really it goes back to that one report that you suggested really would be a good idea.
Yeah, pets are interesting. Okay. This company is obsessed with pets, rightly or wrongly, and I think I remember a friend of mine actually who was launching a dog food, and he went to one of these big Tesco's events where you have a booth and all the buyers are there, and he often tells me this story. He repeats it when he's ever at a beer, but they go back and they ask for the feedback, and he's got his dog there. And one of the buyers said, "What was the feedback from consumers?" And he said, "It's a dog." Therein lies the point. If you or I have something that we don't like the taste of, or that makes us feel unwell, or something's not right, we can vocalize that. Animals can't. And for that, there's to some people's minds crazy. There's an additional level of protection. The GW issue is, I think, slightly different. If you spent 500 million pounds developing this and going through all of these, staged clinical trials, and you've got a medicine, and then you've been bought out, by God, you're going to try and squeeze every last ounce of value out of that. So they will be looking at the CBD industry and seeing that the VMD doesn't allow supplements. Bang, fantastic market there. I would expect GW are actively looking to see how they can get the Epidiolex under another name as an OTC. You would expect them commercially, whether it's Coca-Cola or Pepsi. You're looking at market share. So they in their boardroom, in their wildest dreams, they are the only people that supply CBD. But I think we're foolish to think that they are not looking at all of those different avenues.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Of course, you said over the counter there. I must stress that this is only a rumor, but I did hear some time ago that there was the intention for a Epidiolex format, in a supplemental format for humans in that area. Whether that happens or not, that's again, it's a rumor. But in all honesty, would it be something that GW would sensibly look at? You'd think yes, ordinarily, wouldn't you?
Yeah, we probably shouldn't call them GW anymore.
True.
I fell into my own trap then with the OTC, because it's so often it's like decriminalisation. They're just terms that are wrong, and I shouldn't have used it. I mean, over the counter, the best example of that is take your night nurse. I know it's been recalled, but you've got a medicine that's accepted, and after a period of time, normally minimum of 5 years, you make an application that it becomes a pharmacist. So you go into a chemist and you can buy that over the counter with a couple of caveats. So, are you using any other medication or paracetamol? So I think we're a long way from it being an OTC. I'm not sure how the transfer from a use in Epidiolex, its current uses, would transfer to an OTC, but no doubt they're working at it. But I think we're probably a long way from that. And people often get confused with that because of the the Australian, the TGA issue. I think the worst case scenario is the FDA route, which is if something's a medicine, it can't be a food, and that's nonsense, because we've got examples. I talk about caffeine all the time with that, but CBD becomes a medicine, and then it's not over the counter; it's prescription only. And then after a period of time, it would then become OTC. So I don't see OTC being the solution. I think it would be the worst possible thing that could happen for the supplemental market. Yeah,
I think so. It's hoping that it doesn't kind of go down that road. And moving from that, now GW seem to be the wielder of the 16 lab reports that have Epidiolex written all over them, that are governing the direction that we are ultimately heading. Now, do you think there is the potential for the FSA and GW/Jazz Pharmaceuticals to have at least liaised in regards to how novel foods is moving forward?
It's an interesting one, that, because what a lot of people don't pick up on is the fact that the GW didn't help the FSA. So we know the FSA asked for all of the data, because GW we'll call it. So the Epidiolex owners are sitting on a huge amount of clinical trials and data, and for some of them we've only got the abstract. For others we've got the report, but we don't have the underlying data. So I suspect GW hold a joker. I suspect they have within their body of evidence some negative aspects. I suspect they conducted some trials, or they did certain things in certain ways which came to an adverse effect. And I strongly suspect that as we get closer to potential authorization, someone's going to pop up and go, here's a new one. Before I came on with you, I was just doing my homework, so I went onto the FSA's site, and with the minutes of the last board meeting, where they say authorization may happen Q1 2024, they might be on the market Q1 2025, and then asterisks, all of this is subject to the the Home Office, which we'll come on to later, I'm sure. But they also say, you know, unless there's further information required. So at any stage, that joker can be applied. Look, the facts are, Kevin, GW spent hundreds of millions of pounds. They were surprised by the emergence from the states and other jurisdictions of CBD as a supplement. They were flabbergasted at the speed at which the public took it up. They were exceptionally concerned about the cost to the consumer. And all of a sudden you had a potential erosion of that investment and an exceptionally high prescription price and a limited market with an effectual use. So what did they do? Fact, we know they influenced the Brazilian government. We know they are influencing the FDA, and we know they did every single thing that they possibly could to try and deter the FSA. And I've shared previously, you know, what can only be described as a lobbying letter to the FDA saying, if you allow supplements, you'll undermine investment in medical advancements. How far they went past that and how underhand it is, I don't know. But I'm not surprised by what they did. The question I have, I'll turn it on the head, is why the hell are our regulators and why are our decision makers allowing themselves to be influenced by that? We expect that from the states, where lobbying and you know, the brown envelopes and not so often a brown envelope these days.
Whoa! Let's hold off on those brown envelopes for a second there, sir. That's right, because I feel it's time to introduce today's sponsor of the show, the awesome, the one and only, the legacy company extraordinaire that is Flora-Fusion. Now, I've known these guys for some time. First met them in 2017, and that was 1 year into their journey. Now we're in 2023, and in all that time, they've managed to maintain a 5-star Trustpilot rating. I mean, you know, come on, who else could say they've done that? More to the point, how do you do it? Well, basically you just ensure that you've got a nice, easy to use and clean website. You've got easy to use and awesome products, and of course you have that fantastic customer service to back all of that up. They're also animal friendly in their approach, and you know, the Hemp Hound Agency is always a friend of anyone who comes with an animal-friendly approach. And that, in essence, is exactly what Flora-Fusion are about. Look after you, and yeah, of course, your furry friends too. And if you want to talk to these guys who have been around the block more times than some of these Johnny-come-latelys that are hanging around at the moment, then why not go to their website at www.flora-fusion.com/contact, and you'll be able to talk to someone. Or you can even ring them on 01 333 278 422. So, yeah, tell me about these brown envelopes, sir.
No, I mean, it's common knowledge in lobbying, isn't it? You know, in the pharmaceutical world. I mean, I hope we're not there yet, but we're getting there when you go to a doctor's in the States and they prescribe whoever gave them it used to be a calendar on the desk and a paperweight. Now it's a, you know, cruise to the Bahamas and you know, kickbacks. And we follow the States. Look, I think the issue is much bigger, Kevin. And the industry takes some blame as well. So undoubtedly, GW have and continue to try, or the owners of Epidiolex and a number of other pharmaceutical companies and a number of CBD companies and organisations are attempting to mould, cajole, influence the FSA. The responsibility is on the regulator not to allow that to happen and treat everybody fairly and proportionally. That is their remit. That's not happening, and we've got evidence of that, and that's very, very wrong. But we've seen from this list, you know, the genie is out the bottle. Consumers like to buy CBD products, and they don't all want isolate. The regulatory framework in this country is going to be for an isolate-based product. I suspect it will be at a ridiculously low recommended daily amount, and the rest will be the preserve of the pharmaceutical companies. But that won't stop people producing, it won't stop people manufacturing, it won't stop people supplying, and it won't stop people buying. So everything that they proclaimed they set out to protect, which was consumer detriment, they have failed to do so. And they are creating and continue to create a grey market because they will not regulate what the consumer wants to buy. And whilst I fully agree, there's a huge market for CBD isolate, there is also a very, very large and continuing market, and it was the original market, for whole plant extracts. And then we come to the Home Office. We're in an absolute state of stasis because, as the FSA say themselves, they regulate food. CBD is not a controlled cannabinoid, so it could be a food and it becomes under novel. Unfortunately, even the most highly purified extract, so the isolate, contains in bulk for manufacturing as a minimum controlled cannabinoids. And even the synthetic CBD products, under extreme light and heat, there is an emergence of controlled cannabinoids, much as the FSA and various companies would like to deny, but I've seen the data, I've seen the analysis in degradation studies. So there is a disparity, there is a non-proportional application of the rules, and at the heart of all of this, there is a lack of enforcement, because I sell compliance, I sell legal compliance and advice. 3 years ago, it was very easy for me to convince somebody that the right thing to do was to go down the novel food route, regulated products route, and do everything that they can to be compliant. Notwithstanding existing food law, notwithstanding the fact that they should be selling what they say they're selling, but this new regulatory hurdle. And that only works if you invest that money in that time, and that is investment that goes against stock purchases. It might go against the wages if you're a small business. It certainly goes against against an R&D budget. That is only justifiable if it produces some results. Now, not only do we not have any results yet, and we don't know when we'll have results, we have no enforcement, so we have no incentive. And the Home Office need to decide what an acceptable level of controlled cannabinoids is. They need to decide which are the controlled cannabinoids that they're going to control, because there's 12, and they can only test for 5. Most people only test for 2. So they need to decide what they are. They need to decide what's acceptable, and they need to change the law. They need to change the law in a minimum of 2 ways. They need to set, let's call it a contaminant level. So above that, great, crack on Home Office and police if you want to. That's a narcotic, misuse of drugs. If it's below that, leave it alone. It's the Food Standards Agency. How do we prove? What are the standards? What's the type of testing to demonstrate we meet that threshold? It sounds very easy, but it's very difficult for them. And the other change in the law is they need to create a license so that somebody who is going to manufacture or produce the ingredient in this country, and that's another story, but somebody who's going to manufacture, at the moment, there's no license to manufacture CBD products, because what they need to do is change the misuse of drugs. They need to allow someone to obtain a Home Office license to handle controlled cannabinoids in a raw ingredient, in a litre or a kilo, after they have demonstrated that the consumer item will be compliant with food law. So they can handle and store and control and conduct, not just research, but manufacture CBD supplements, CBD products, and they demonstrate that the end product meets the specifications and it's a food, not a narcotic. So there is so much more to be done. And then we have this, what I can only describe as sort of an 80s, 90s nightclub queue, where if you're not on the list, you're not coming in. And you've got people patiently waiting there who are really good punters, and then someone trots past them because it's who they know the doorman or they know the club owner. And that's what this list is. Championing, I'm validated, you're not validated, you're not on the list. And I've got clients that didn't place their products on the market because it's unlawful to do so, and followed the advice and submitted a novel food application, and still haven't had any communication from the FSA. Yet, if you broke the law for the longer period of time, you've now got this free pass, which is probably going to extend to 2025, unless they start culling them in the risk assessment phase. But we've got 12,000 products on the list, and we've got less than 3,000 validated.
Yeah, I was going to touch on the potential for all companies being listed. As it goes, I know quite a few who are missing certain products. There just seems to be a general blank walling from the FSA in regards to why those products are missing. But you know, you've covered that. Going back to the GW angle. Now, you mentioned the Home Office. Now,
You like the GW angle, don't you?
it's something that I feel I need to get a full grasp on. But certainly when we're talking about controlled cannabinoid levels and impending announcements on that, do you think it's fair to say that GW/Jazz Pharmaceuticals proclaimed 20+ long year strong working relationship with the Home Office has the potential to cause frustrations with that, in that they could potentially not be viewed as being impartial when setting these levels that we are going to see soon?
Firstly, I don't think they'll set those levels. Look, let's break it down. GW have been in this game longer than anybody else, rightly or wrongly. They've achieved their drug. They want to protect it. They are doing everything they can to influence anybody that could bite into those profits. There is nothing illegal about that. The problem would come if the regulators were unduly influenced or made decisions based on influence. Now, before we go back to how that may have happened, I think it's important to look forward. The Home Office hold the key to this industry, and their decision as to what is and what isn't permissible in a CBD product. And still, until that happens, we have a situation where the Food Standards Agency and other government departments, because there was joined up thinking at the start of this, encouraged people to embark on an exceptionally expensive route to compliance, which would be backed by enforcement, and which forced a lot of them down the route of animal testing. Now, if the Home Office set that at zero, then they have encouraged people who they knew at the time had products containing controlled cannabinoids to do so. And they have validated some of those products. So I think they get themselves into some real problems then, because they chose to accept and ignore the unlawful presence of controlled cannabinoids and have allowed those products to remain on the market. Now, however they caveat with their website about we don't say that you should buy them, they were actively, along with certain influencers, going to retailers and telling them just stock these products. So they've got themselves into a huge mess. Now, I think they've got bigger issues to fry than whether somebody from central London who runs an association wants to apply pressure because I think their business is going down the pan and they're desperately twisting an arm here and there, or whether you've got a pharmaceutical company. I think they're in a mess. They're in a mess because they've got far too many applications, and that's CBD and non-CBD. Brexit did them no favours. They can't retain staff, they can't recruit staff, and they have a lack of expertise. And the whole thing is a perfect storm of absolute nonsense. And unfortunately, within that storm, there are victims. There are employees, whether they be young people on the sales desk, whether they be scientists, laboratory technicians. There are people who've lost their investments. There are people who've lost their savings, their incomes. And the blame has to lie with the disorganized nature of the regulatory officers in this country. And they are fully aware of that. And they are that tied up in all of the crap that they've caused mostly themselves now, that whichever way they seek to undo the knot and untie themselves, they just fall into another disaster. So there are now ramifications. Public list. What's new on the market? I mean, you couldn't have made a bigger mess than that if you tried. And we told them that at the time. It's well documented. Paul Tossell, no, that's what we do. We could have just taken everything off the market. Well, you should have done. Because then people wouldn't spend the money and no one would be enforcing, and we'd still have the same CBD industry. So people would still be buying those products, yet we wouldn't be in the mess we are now. I mean, there's an argument for that. Was any of this necessary? But I don't see how they can turn. Civil service practice is promote up. So maybe what you do is no one takes the blame. There's a collective avoidance of blame in a lot of sort of government departments. So move those people out, fresh start, and then admit our mistakes. Let's reflect back and try and find a way through the woods. But I don't think GW are the biggest problem at the moment. I think the Home Office stasis, their inability to make a decision, is what's causing the most damage for the industry.
I don't know. That's a fair comment. And I kind of want to say on that even though I've written quite a few critical articles, I'm not kind of blind to the fact that there is communication issues, there is uncertainty, and it's not just from our side, it's from there as well. You know, who is running the show? Why aren't they being quick with their announcements? Why is there no solid basis that we can all work by and understand for moving forwards? And you know, to say it's all the FSA, no, that would be wrong. It's all the Home Office. Well, I'll be a bit hesitant to say that that's completely wrong, but that's what I kind of see at the moment. But equally, it is potentially an argument for an FDA style kind of department in the UK, because we do have a lot of voices interacting in the CBD scene. Don't get me wrong, like I have a look stateside and it worries me, but the concept of a single department, do you think that would bear kind of sensible thought for the UK if that was to happen?
Well, as long as they didn't put it in Reading University. I mean, I think what you need to make sure is that if you're giving a university £1 million in sort of sponsorship, then and you're the one that seeks to benefit the most from decisions that an advisory committee are making to a government department, then it probably isn't right that you should have people who are on there who also suffer from terrible memories. I mean, if someone's going to be making such important decisions, you would think when it said, do you have a conflict of interest? You might remember, oh yeah, God, yeah, we got £1 million from them. Yeah, oh no, I've got a job with them. There you go. No, I don't think we should have an FDA. I think what we should have is the FSA looks after food, the Home Office looks after drugs, the MHRA looks after medicines. We can have a pharmaceutical Epidiolex, another cannabinoid, Sativex, you know, Marinol, whatever you want to have. We can have a supplement. We can have a food supplement industry, which, if it strays into making health claims in medical terms, the MHRA should issue stop notices. If they have controlled cannabinoids, the Home Office should instruct frontline staff to remove those products. I am a fan of having something like the FACT, you know, the Federation Against Copyright. So I am a fan of, at some stage, once we know what the rules are, because you can't enforce anything until you know whether something's, you know, was on the market, wasn't on the market, is a drug, is a food. Once you know what these things are, collectively, the industry could get together and say, look, we all paid all of this money, whether we paid it as a consortium, whether we paid it as individuals, we've all achieved this level of compliance. We're going to have to police this ourselves. So I think an industry FDA, that would work. Another government department fills me full of dread. It's difficult enough working out who you need to write to at the moment. I mean, the amount of addresses the FSA have, I mean, you know, the amount of email prefixes and the ability for them to say that it went to one corner of the room and not the other. Yeah, I think we lead fewer layers of bureaucracy. That we're not talking about something dangerous here. We are talking about a supplement that your granny's using, that people are feeding to their pets, that some people are giving to children. And A&E isn't full of people, you know. I mean, look, the MHRA list, which the wonderful Professor Alan Bubis sent to me when he was annoyed that I challenged his credibilities along with my peers about his interpretation of the available science, beggars belief. And I know you've done a huge amount of work on it. But the evidence of yellow carding and adverse effects in CBD products doesn't exist when you look at that list. It's recreational products, pharmaceutical products, THC containing products, and the vast majority of them predate before we had the ability to produce a CBD product. So I think we've got too many people involved. We've also got the worrying issue that you've got people advising the EFSA who are now advising the FSA and saying that they are able to partition their brain between the two organisations, and that the decisions of one won't influence the decision of the other. I mean, human nature comes into this. So I'm trying to think of some positives. We need the Home Office to act. That's the first element. We need the people that are making responsible CBD products in this country to be able to get a license, to be able to get a bank account in the UK, high street bank account, and to be able to insure themselves properly, and to have that longevity and that transparency to further investment and become a centre of excellence. And then we need to be able to actually produce those ingredients in the United Kingdom and allow people to grow hemp and utilise the leaves and buds of the plant. We have a long way to go. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because I'm not overly enamoured about what's happening in the rest of Europe or around the world. And one thing about the cannabis industry is the longer you wait to act, the more examples of bad practice and mistakes you have to examine, to see if you can move forward in a more pragmatic and more positive fashion.
Now, I sense that you might have been alluded to Germany there, which we will touch on, but there's one last question in this section that I kind of want to ask your opinion on. That is, can the FSA confirm whether they are awaiting evidence from the applicants themselves, or if it is from the Home Office and covers topics such as controlled cannabinoid levels? Now, we have touched on this in quite a broad way, but I do know that obviously I sent this question to you before, and you wanted to touch a little bit more on there. Is there any kind of extra bits you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's the little picture and there's the big picture. So the little picture is the regulated products, and those awaiting evidence are just that. So in order to get validated, the FSA requires you to provide a dossier which gives them sufficient information for it to be passed the risk assessment to. So when you're awaiting evidence, there is missing information in that dossier. So when they say awaiting evidence, they mean just that. They have sent a question out to the applicant and asked them to provide that information. Now, normally that will be 14 days, 28 days, or the applicant can say, I'm afraid it's going to take me longer, and the FSA will make a decision. So everybody on that list awaiting evidence has been asked a question. It could be that they are to submit the toxicology data, and that the FSA have agreed an extension of time for that to be submitted. It could be that there are issues with regard to the extraction process. There might be quantification required for the solvents used within that process. It may be that the dossier itself has not been compiled correctly. So in areas where you're looking at the specification, for example, that might not be sufficient. It may be that there is insufficient data showing the credentials or certification or methods and matrices used by laboratories who are very reluctant to hand these over. So there's a whole number of reasons. The bigger picture is it serves the purpose, because there is a clock that starts running. So once all the time you're asking an applicant questions, you're under no pressure. And we know, I think that they've got 200 in the system that are not validated. So it serves their purpose to extend this period of time and give them the opportunity to try and actually move some of these further through the process. But the fact of the matter is, when everybody gets into, if all the people that are going to get validated will get validated, I don't know how that will be, but then they're all in the risk assessment phase. And that's when the fun really starts. I've said this, a couple of years ago. Validation's like getting your number for the marathon. You haven't even started running the race yet, So no one starts jumping up and down at the start, of the marathon, telling everyone they've won the race and look how good I am. They do that 26.5 miles later or whatever it is. And the problem that the FSA's got there is that it's a bit like, when you go to get on Ryanair and you think you've gone through boarding, and then they stick you on the stairs, and you sat there on the stairs or stood on the stairs for the next hour and a half because they just wanted you out of that, that gate area. And I think that's what risk assessment is at the moment, because they cannot do anything until the Home Office tell them which products are in and out. So the Home Office, with the stroke of a pen, if they say it's 0, and it's 0 to 3 decimal points, then immediately anyone that's declared cannabinoid content above that is out. And I would suggest what follows swiftly afterwards is the requirement for an ACAS accredited laboratory who is experienced in each of those individual matrices that the CBDs or the broad spectrum carried in, will then have to go back and test again. And at the CBD show last year, I said this to Paul Tosson and he agreed with me. So we're not getting on that flight, never mind starting the marathon. We are in a holding pen. So I think awaiting evidence is two-stage. At the moment, they're awaiting evidence from the applicant, and the applicant will be told what that evidence is. And it could be a block piece of evidence from a consortium. And then the FSA, if you like, are awaiting evidence once they get past validation, and that evidence will, in the first stage, come from the Home Office.
Or possibly GW. We'll have to wait and see on that one. Now, we're going to take a slight break on that and talk about a subject that you wanted to bring up, which is Germany. Now, I got a little kind of thing to, you know, I've got history with Germany. I'm a forces kid. I lived in 3 different places. The last place was Gütersloh. Wasn't far from the German-Dutch border, and it's where I kind of fell in love with cannabis. Shall we say, I was a rapper for my sins. I was on stage 5 times. I was paid in weed because I thought that was how things operated back then. But the whole dynamic over there, it just encouraged me a little bit. I loved the kind of cultural and community feel of cannabis before anything else. Now, that's just sidetracking because, you know.
Stop you there. And where were you? Because in Germany, there's a huge difference in approach to cannabis. I mean, for years, we've had, you know, cities like Berlin and other areas of Germany pushing aggressively for legalization. And we've got other areas of Germany that are aggressively pushing back the other way. So it's, you know, it's not a unified country with this approach to cannabis.
I was in Detmold. I can't quite remember what part of Germany that was.
Too much weed.
No, I was only about 5 at the time. I hope not. Then there was Hildesheim, which is quite close to Hanover, and then Gütersloh, like I said, is only about 30 to 50 miles away from the Dutch border in Westphalia. So, you know, few places, but Gütersloh was where I kind of embraced cannabis as it was. Now, in regards to what's happened in Germany, it's an interesting thing because I look at it and I get conflicted because I like the idea of decriminalization and then moving towards legalization. I personally feel that people shouldn't have criminal records for cannabis use up to a certain point. They should be expunged, and I believe that only happens with decriminalization. But I kind of understand that with any kind of move into this sector, you need the help and aid of businesses, whether that be the pharmaceutical sector or the big business that leads to, you know, the legalized sector. Now, there's a divide on this. Now, I know you have quite an interesting opinion. So tell me your thoughts on it, sir.
Yeah. I mean, the first point is that decriminalisation is not the solution anywhere. That's not necessarily what Germany are doing at the moment, and that is a good point. So decriminalisation means that a state or institution retains all the laws but just chooses not to enforce them. What we need is legalisation. So what disappoints me about Germany is they misled the voters. It was the vote winner, and I think if they're honest, they knew that they had 2 ceilings. One was the EU, which is the blocker, and then you've got the UN. So I think what they've done is they've appeased the voters, but they've only appeased a very, very small section of the population. So what they're going to do is they're going to create a law. So they are going to legalise cannabis clubs and home cultivation. They haven't set the THC level, and they're talking about, I don't know how you enforce that. Presumably you just say, well, this plant's only over 15%. And that's for 5 years. That's it, because they're not going to go any further. They've missed an opportunity. And the opportunity was, we need legalisation because I think we need to distinguish between medicinal cannabis, pharmaceutical cannabis, medicinal cannabis for the group of people who need clinical oversight, self-medication, and that's a broad group which which arches over recreational use. And the problem that you have is, unless you have business in, and I've seen lots of comments saying this is great, it's not about America, everyone, business is making a buck, this is for the people. It's not. This is still a path to organised crime in the black market, because I don't care what you say, it's exactly the same in Holland. Black market supply. Now, there are people undoubtedly who are very good at growing cannabis, and there are people that very quickly will be able to grow 3 plants. I know individuals that grow a single plant and they never pay for cannabis. There will be cannabis clubs, but it will hemorrhage with black market cannabis. And what it means is you can't have a situation where businesses that are going to cultivate and come in and provide a long-term solution can do so. And what I think is the UK has got an incredible opportunity to take one step further and learn from, because I think that is a mistake in Germany, because it helps the stoner, it helps the self-medicator, and I hate that term because I'm not sold on it. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't help people that really need cannabis for medical conditions. It doesn't help them at all. And I don't think it's going to solve the problem, because I think the ability to grow the plants, I think that will wane very quickly. It's not as easy. The people that are already doing it will continue to do it lawfully. People that aren't doing it now probably won't do it. Some will go and buy the tent, some will go and buy the lights, they'll spend the 500 quid, they'll wait 3 months and think, shit, Christ, I'll ring my dealer. Or, you know, I'll tell you what, I'll go and get a license, and I'll go to the academy. No, I'll go and see George down the road. What we've got as a situation is where in the UK, and let's talk about the UK alone, you've got the Home Office, the MHRA, the police are happy with licensed cultivation sites for medicinal cannabis. So they've been through hoops to get there, and hopefully more and more people are going to be doing that. So you've got a situation where the government, the man, if you like, is happy with their element of control over that. And at the moment, a lot of it is going to individuals who can legitimise recreational use or self-medication. Very little of it is going to people that need political oversight. So the government is aware of that, and that supply is oversupply. So at the moment we have too much flower. Most of that problem comes from North America and Canada, and the fact that you've got companies like Hexo, Tilray, Canopy that grew too much, and you've got poor quality product coming in, and they're now going into the Czech Republic, they're going into Germany, and what we have is an opportunity here to create a cannabis club model. I don't necessarily like the cannabis club, but we could take these banks, these buildings, these pubs, get responsible people, individuals who can go through all the checks and achieve a further license to run a club. And then we have a controlled environment that the police are happy with, because if you can get a shotgun license, keep a shotgun in your lounge, you can keep a bag of cannabis in a former pub, you know. And what always amazes me is the fact that the police and the regulatory authorities think that people aren't going to protect their commercial interests. Nobody wants to be robbed, whether it's bottles of spirits, packets of cigarettes, or cannabis. So we need to have an adult approach to this. So you then have a club where we could join, Kevin, if we wanted to. We'd show our ID. I don't care if you have to be over 21 or 18, whatever makes the government happy. No alcohol there. And the supply of cannabis comes from a government-controlled licensed premise in the interim. And we have a pilot. Let's say we have it for 18 months. So we have 18 months when people are smoking cannabis, which is grown in a government-controlled licensed environment. We can demonstrate that there is an increase in social goods. So the social harm that's associated with organised crime will naturally diminish, because people will go there. And we then have the ability to put the infrastructure in place to legalise cannabis and have a supply that the government's happy with. Because the main issue that I see is to legalise cannabis at the moment, the only supply route can be from the black market. So we have to utilise, and let's be honest, the number of these players in the medicinal cannabis market are only in medicinal because it's a revenue stream while they perfect their craft. And the moment there is a recreational market, boom, they're that way. But I have one desire and one want from that, and that is I don't want the government to tax it, because the moment legal weed becomes more expensive than illegal weed, nobody buys legal weed. So what you're going to do is, yes, of course you can have an element of revenue from it, but I want a 1% levy, a 1% tax on the sale of that cannabis that goes to a pot that's controlled. I don't know, maybe we need a new control for patients to have their private prescriptions paid for, so that all the children and some of the adults who need clinical supervision, children that are in palliative care, who are dying, children who are fitting, and they don't have to pay for that. And then if there's money left over, and there should be, then we can invest and try and find out what type of trial, what would make the government happy. Because it's not doctors, you know, I speak to lots of doctors who are very happy to prescribe. And they don't prescribe because if they do, they'll lose their job. So it's not frontline medical staff, it's not many consultants. Somewhere in that government, in that ether, there are people stopping this happening. And I think Germany could have been brave, and Germany could have challenged the European Union, because there is nothing in European law, back to that, which forbids them from doing so. The problem that the Germans have is that you've got the three pillars of European Union. You know, the two biggies are free movement of people and goods and the Schengen Agreement, and that just prevents you doing it if your neighbour objects. So unless you've got this unified belief, and we've got strong political lobbies and strong, you know, Orthodox Christians in countries like Greece that have real political influence that won't allow it to happen. We don't have any of those shackles here in this country. And I think there's a mechanism which would be hard to argue against for the government. And I think the human rights approach should have been one that Germany adopted and developed upon the Canadian model, where they looked at social harm, they looked at health, they looked at poverty, they looked at crime, and all of that is a result of the war on drugs. And the real people we need to attack here is organised crime. It's not the government. They made the mistakes, but the problem is organised crime, and we need to eliminate the black market supply.
That's very, very true. Yeah, I do, you know, forgive me, but I've noticed something in regards to Albanian gangs. Now, I don't normally kind of mention, you know, a gang is a gang, but it seems to be Albanians who have been able to bring the price down, certainly down this way in South Devon, to the equivalent of £78 an ounce if you buy on a kilo. Now, that is quite a low price, and I suspect that their push for quality and lower prices is going to cause a little bit of an issue in regards to competing with that. So actually, what you saying, a 1% tax, I think that's a fair call, and certainly them ploughing that into the NHS to at least cover the vast majority of prescription costs, you know, or if not all, under certain circumstances.
I'm talking about covering the private prescription costs, because there aren't enough. I mean, you're talking about the Albanians there. Look, the drug industry's been around a long time. It used to be quite simple in the sort of 70s and 80s, and then into the 90s it changed. And you had certain groups that controlled. You're quite right. We do have very organised crime, and we also have a situation where there's massive cultivation taking place in the UK, which wasn't taking place in the 80s. So the ability to actually take hold of that market is far easier. The government, the drugs policy of the government is to eliminate county lines, protect, reduce social harm, protect vulnerable groups, and to eliminate organised crime. It would be a refreshing approach to say we don't have to tax cannabis, because the benefit to the National Health Service, the ability to free up police officers to deal with other types of crimes, look at domestic violence, the ability for our frontline staff not to have to deal with the war on drugs associated issues, far outweighs a desire to legalise cannabis and put an additional tax on top of it. You can place your VAT on it, you know, direct taxation's fine, but I think we can learn lessons from abroad. The fact of the matter is, a huge amount of people smoke cannabis. We have created an opportunity for those that can afford to or want to legitimise their cannabis use via private prescription to do so. So we've already taken a step there. We don't have sufficient numbers of prescriptions in the UK actually to have a really strong voice. And the solution here would be to get as many people as possible onto private prescription, which is exactly against what I want, which is why I want them to be registered to be legally smoking cannabis if they choose to do so. Then you've got political weight, because then you've got a demographic and you've got an influential voting group. I think what Germany have done is swept this under the carpet. I don't think it provides a long-term solution. It will make a number of people very happy. those that were growing their 3 plants in the loft will now be growing them on the windowsill, except they'll probably have to still put them back in the loft to get the lights. And I think you'll see more crime. I know it's not a popular opinion, but I temper that with the fact that I think there's a real opportunity in the UK to legalise cannabis in a controlled fashion. But the key element here is you can't legalise cannabis until you have a supply. Legalising cannabis with a black market supply is incredibly damaging. We have a supply. We could encourage people to cultivate more cannabis. Once we have the pilots complete and it's full legalisation, of course, it won't have to meet pharmaceutical standards, but it'll still need to meet standards. So the consumer will demand consistency, and it probably come under the FSA, I would think, Kevin. The FSA will have all of the requirements for testing for mycotoxins, heavy metals, pesticides. So I think we'll just have a cheaper route to market, and I think the way the price per gram of medicinal cannabis has been forced down, and because of the oversupply, I think because of the volumes involved, that a medicinal cultivator at the moment would be happy to take 90 pence for a gram because they would like to be part of that pilot. It would cover their cost of goods. And I think you would then have a situation in the future where people would pay more for artisan brands, and I think the price would come down eventually.
Right, okay, it's the second time to stop and get some of that funky music back on. Now, I just want to take some time to talk to you about the Hemp directory, which you can find on our website, and it's a great place to go, because at the end of the day, you need to kind of find who you want to work with. And, you know, some directories will give you a little bit of a flavour of a company, but they don't give you the feel, the ethos. You know, everyone can have the most amazing products, everyone can do the most amazing things, but can they? And that's where my directory comes in, the Hemp directory. It's there to more humanise the companies that you have a potential of working with. And we also offer service providers that can help you in other areas. So it's not just about sourcing the right CBD products. You know, it's about finding those who you want to work with, who you feel comfortable working with, and those who can offer services to help your business tick along just that little bit more effectively, whether that be import-export services, payment providers. Well, we've got it all there for you. So feel free to use it, because that's what it's there for. It's there free of charge, and well, it's a little bit funky, you know. And you know, by funky, I mean it's not as sterile as everyone else is, and I think that's another thing that's needed. So use the directory, have a little scan, and you know, as we grow, more lists will appear, and as more lists appear, you get a chance to meet other companies who provide those services that you're looking for. Now, that's Germany. So I just want to basically ask you about your recent appearance in Canna-Man TV.
Look, Connor is an incredibly talented young man, and not a lot of people know, but you know, he wrote a book about cannabis in 2019, and he's pretty much self-taught, and he's an amazing animator, does all the voices himself, and I just kind of been mentoring him a little bit. He's got some very grand plans, and there's a metaverse, Canna-Land specific metaverse getting launched in the States on 420, which Matt and I we're going to be in the metaverse offering our services. And I just thought it was a fantastic opportunity to sort of get Connor some exposure. And he promised me that he would sort of portray this Gandalf type wise character, and that I would really like the image. So obviously my modesty got the better of me, and I did some voice recording for him, and then he created something. I'm very disappointed that so many people tell me it's such a good likeness. Let's put it that way.
I did think it was a little bit harsh on the grey hairs. You know, there is definitely some colour there, but I didn't think it was that bad, and certainly. So, do you think this is going to be a return character position possibly down the line, or?
It's great fun. I hope so. I mean, the whole point is, you know, parody. You've got to be able to, you've got to be able to take a joke. There's far too many times. I think I'm guilty of being. I come across as Mr. Angry is the serious. So, I think there's room for that. It's something I really enjoyed, and I'd like to do it again.
And I just want to give him a shout out because this metaverse Canna-Man TV or Canna-Land is being launched on 4/20 in the US. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's the Canna-Land being launched on 4/20, US based to start with, and obviously Canna-Man TV will be in there. You'll be able to click on it and see, and then, you know, roll out into the UK. A lot of people are suspicious and worried about this new technology, but I think that the focus of the team of Mark Bonner is there's a huge educational part, and I think the ability to go in to you know, with augmented reality, you don't need VR sets or anything like that, but the ability to go in there and talk to a doctor potentially. From the state side, obviously there'll be dispensaries eventually, and there'll be opportunity to purchase things. But I think for people that perhaps wouldn't necessarily go or have access to go and talk to somebody, the opportunity to do that online can only be a good thing. Look, I'm a dinosaur when it comes to technology. Fortunately, my kids have dragged me through, but I don't understand how it works, Kevin. But I don't think you need to. I don't think it's going to be particularly complicated, and I suspect that's the way the world's going. You know, I was never a gamer, but it's explained to me it's very similar. And obviously, I've seen my youngest playing, you know, Call of Duty and that sort of thing. So I appreciate the fact that when you get your visa statement and you've got 150 quid on there, and I don't understand what the hell an in-game purchase was, and then I find out that he's bought a baseball cap that he doesn't actually have, and it's on a character. But I think it's going to be fun, and I think it's the future. Not to be too corny.
Well, best of luck to Connor. I've had the pleasure of talking to him, and he certainly is a talented individual. And you know, best of luck for that venture moving forward. Now, let's get back. Now, we have talked a little bit in regards to, shall we say, people who haven't kind of stuck their hands up and said, "Oh, we've got influence or conflicts here." Now, the first 4 questions that we've
rarely do, though, don't they? They rarely do. That's the point, isn't it?
That's it. And what's the 4 questions that I've asked so far focus more predominantly on the FSA with touch-ins on the Home Office. The FSA is a little bit more broader than that, than just that singular entity. We do have the Centre of Toxicity. We do have the advisory group on, Advisory Council on Novel Foods and Processes.
Advisory Committee for Novel Foods and Processes, yeah.
That's the one. And one that I didn't realise was there until recently was the EU Working Group on Novel Foods. Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned Reading University earlier, but my own research suggests that they're not the only ones. In fact, I've got a university within spitting distance who basically conducted research into Sativex in 2011. Now, of course, ties back to safety, but one of these people from Plymouth University, who's still there, I've noticed that he was there quoting his conflicts into, I think one of them was olive leaf oil, and there was another product. But we've got to stay in the world of fact here, and obviously this is something that I'm very conscious of when I talk to you. I've had a little look at all of the minutes for any meeting that is available. Unfortunately, I can't find any that actually directly relates to CBD. So we can't be sure, really, whether or not they have declared their interests, only that meetings have actually happened behind closed doors, shall we say. So what's your opinion on that then, sir?
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a moment. So if you're a regulatory body, whether you're the Committee on Toxicity or whether you're the FSA or an advisory committee, risk assessment team, and something like cannabis and CBD comes along, the likelihood is you probably have very limited knowledge. So what you are going to want to bring expertise in, and you would hope that you would bring expertise in, and you would hope that the level of knowledge and understanding and expertise would be sufficient enough to guide and provide advice to make those very important decisions that are going to affect the industry. So I see nothing wrong with that. I do, and I said this before, I question the ability of somebody to provide that advice when their memory is so shocking that they can't remember their commercial research that they conducted on cannabis, but they can on olive oil. Now, there's a recurring theme here as well. There's a bit of a revolving door going around as well. You seem to have somebody in, and I'm talking fact here, as somebody that comes in who might have a questionable association, and then all of a sudden they're not there then when the next meeting or a further meeting when the decision's made. So look, it raises questions. It's not good. It's not a conspiracy theory either. Is it undue influence? I don't know. I'm not going to question anybody's professional conduct. It certainly doesn't send out the right image. And when you look at the way Deloitte have been appointed and the lack of industry representation in feeding into what is essentially a review of 80% of the regulated products being CBD, you are entitled, I think, when you don't have a validated application or when you are stuck in the risk assessment compound, to question what's going on. I think I'm not a fan of circumstantial evidence, but I think in this case, when you put it all together, you can only come to one conclusion, which is people have failed to declare interests. There have been people present at decision-making points in time who shouldn't have been, or would certainly have been recused in a legal environment, or would have declared an interest, and that hasn't been done. And that naturally leads to suspicion. And when the regulator is either failing to or not communicating decisions which it purports to have made, I think you're justified in coming to the conclusion that there's a rabbit off. That's a technical term, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's sensible because there has been names indicated, you know, by various means for each one of those associate organizations, and you know, if it was just a single person who didn't stick their hand up in the center of toxicity meeting, even though there was two representatives in some of the meetings who were from Unilever or you know, some companies who were thinking about stepping into that space, but a person on that panel couldn't stick their hand up and say, "Oh, I've got a similar conflict."
You know, I mean, if you're sitting, it wasn't on Zoom because this predates COVID, so you'd have to assume that they were sitting in a room around a big table when somebody says, by the way, I work for Unilever and we're considering entering this space in the future, so I don't think it's appropriate. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm part of an institution that's had £1 million worth of grants, donations to look at the efficacy of CBD. What part of me thinks I shouldn't stick my hand in the air? But look, happens all around us. It's happened since, you know, the beginning of time. We've got to be careful not to be too far distracted. I don't think there's anything that can be done about it. Clearly, they don't appear to like having it pointed out to them. So that there's not a positive outcome coming from it, and I think they justifiably can say that there was no undue influence, and you know, how do you prove those things? It just stinks, doesn't it, Kevin?
Yeah, and that comes back to one of those things, isn't it? There's suspicion versus fact. This is clearly a suspicious area, But, you know, other than the COT meetings, you know, we don't have any cast iron facts to back up the ANFCP or the EU working groups on novel foods. Now,
we know who the names are, Kevin. You know, I mean, we're not, but we know who the names are. But to be honest, to undermine the industry, all they have to do is ignore positives and highlight negatives. Because at the end of the day, the decision makers are looking at preventing consumer detriment and harm. And if you've got somebody there with scientific evidence who's saying to you there's a risk here, then those people making that decision have got a responsibility to look further. So I think it's almost impossible to drill down and see what actually took place. But anybody looking at the facts would say that it wasn't handled the way it should have been.
No. But you know, maybe things will improve as we go along. So now I did ask another question, but I think at the end of the day that is kind of mute, and that was whether GW had any interest employed in the COT meeting. That's what I asked last year. Obviously we can kind of see that there is a picture that, yeah, it just raises
the answer is yes. It's yes, Kevin. They certainly did, and that's why they were there. They were there to protect their investment and their interests, and they did so by writing to the FDA and basically saying, if you allow a CBD supplement industry, what you're doing is you are going to prevent investment into medicines. You can't be any more blunt than that. No. Undoubtedly, they went with an agenda. The question is whether or not they were able to influence the outcome and to what extent, and whether or not their presence there caused decisions to be made that on reflection were not justified. Now, we don't know any of that. What we do know is that the decisions that were made and the lack of decisions being made and the delays would point to the fact that there is something amiss.
Definitely. And on that miss, now, recently I came across a redacted Article 4, which kind of fits into the dynamic of this. You know, something's amiss, but what is it? Now, it's weirdly convenient that the two redacted areas are 37 characters and 17 characters long, and that those spaces respectively could be GW Pharmaceuticals and UK Home Office, or the other way round, and the 19 could be Epidiolex/Epidiolex, right? But what we are seeing is a strange document in my eyes, because it seems to be comparing something, possibly Epidiolex/Epidiolex, to MCT products. Now, the fact that there's redacted names at the top next to the FSAs, I understand, you know, with the novel foods process, you can have a level of anonymity if you are protecting your IP or your interests or whatnot. But the document in itself strikes me as weird. Now, there was an announcement of sorts in 2017 that suggested that CBD isolate was novel, but nothing else. But then we come to 2018 and there's a secret meeting at EU level between the FSA and obviously the EFSA. Now,
it wouldn't have been secret at that stage. They would have been we were part of the European Union, so the FSA would be there holding their seat at the table as part of the union. So I think don't distinguish between the FSA and the EFSA at that stage. I think they're one and the same at that point in time, because the FSA was instrumental in driving this forward. So I think there's a distinction to be made post withdrawal.
Okay, no, that's just a fair point. Now, why would you think that the FSA would make a distinction in 2017, only to then approach the EU in 2018 to kind of verify that distinction? Wouldn't it be the case that if that distinction was made in the UK alone, then that would then have precedence across the entirety of the EU?
No, what would happen would be, so you've got the Commission and you've got the EFSA, and so each country's got its own food regulator. We've got the FSA, and then the European food body is the EFSA and the Commission. So what happens is each state will be feeding in and seeking advice. And ultimately, the EFSA will refer to the Commission and ask the Commission for advice, which is what's happening in novel foods at the moment. The same process exists. So it's only there is an exchange of information between the EFSA and the Commission. So at the moment, the EFSA are looking to validate these applications, and they want the Commission to make a decision on the appropriate use of CBD in a food supplement, and then they'll look at matrices and products later. So there is a mechanism that you feed into. So the FSA could well have would rightly have had consultations here and be feeding into consultations, which in turn would go to the Commission for a decision. Whether the parties that are taking place in concert with that are appropriate on it is a different matter. I mean, you've alluded to the fact that the Home Office should the Home Office be involved with the food. Again, contra argument there is yes, they should at that time, and that's why they still are now, because it's not. We don't know if it's not classified as a food until we set an acceptable level of controlled cannabinoids. It is the Home Office's remit, because the Home Office controls drugs, and we know that CBD products contain controlled cannabinoids, so they have a vested interest. What that tells you is they were aware of that problem some 6 years ago. They were actively considering it 5 years ago, and here we are now, where the whole of the industry is crippled on the basis, and another government department which is subservient to it are unable to move forward. And you know, and another issue here is the FSA aren't ministerially controlled. You know, they're this autonomous body. Some might say a coven. I won't. So you know, formed by statute, whereas the Home Office, you've got ministerial control. So it beggars belief that they thought they could just ignore such an important issue. And we know before withdrawal that the UK were part of discussions with the other member states to try and agree on a contaminant level, and that all went to pot, excuse the pun, with the withdrawal, and then various events have overtaken things, such as our withdrawal, fractions in the European Union, and now we've got the war in Ukraine, and we've had COVID. So it's just not a priority for them. But yeah, I think you're onto something. I just think, again, there's a lack of transparency.
Now, this is the part where I want to talk about misrepresentation, because it does seem to be quite rife. You know, we've touched on the MHRA yellow card scheme, and certainly with this Article 4, it confuses me. Now, if it was GW and Epidiolex, then we're having we have an Article 4 defining requirements in the industry that are based on a pharmaceutical product. Now, you know as well as I do, back in the day, if you tried to confuse your food supplemental product with a pharmaceutical product, the MHRA would be all over you. You know, so is there a kind of disparity on kind of approach here?
There potentially there is. Again, you know, devil's advocate, you're taking a medicine. It wouldn't be the first time that a medicine had then transferred across to sort of food supplements. You know, we've got plenty of examples there. I suspect they were testing the water. They would, and I think they're still doing that, because it's all about market share. What it demonstrates is an acute awareness of novel foods and attention by GW at that stage, and it marks for me the beginning of their, I'm tempted to say interference, I shall say close observation of the decision-making process.
Nice pull fact there, sir. And yeah, I suppose I mean, language is key there. I personally feel that interference could be a word, but then you can easily transplant that to protecting IP that you spent hundreds of millions of pounds on. You know, at what point does something become a little bit off versus, you know, being illegal? And this is something that we've talked about before, the difference between illegal and immoral. Now, I'm not afraid to bring up the term ultra varies. I have brought it up a few times, and in fact, my mother's apologized for bringing it up because she says I've been talking about it too much. But it is all about the intention of the Home Office, and certainly when we look at 2018, they seem to have been quite busy. Now, if they were on that document, now I hear your reasons on where cannabis was viewed, but if they were working with GW to protect their share more than actually protect what they're policing, at what level does it become immoral versus ultra varies?
Again, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you, Kevin, because I'm not disagreeing with the conclusion that you're coming to, but you have to think at that time, the Home Office was facing an unprecedented situation where elements of cannabis were becoming available on the high street, widespread, as a food supplement, was unregulated. People were believing that it could contain THC. They were actively talking about it. They were marketing it as containing THC. And I think you had GW, and there are undeniable connections between GW and the Home Office, which again, you would have hoped somebody would have sat back and looked at the perception of this. But I think they were probably trying to determine what the appetite was from the governing body at the time, which would have been the European Commission, to make a decision on cannabidiol as a food supplement. And the Home Office then has decisions to make as to whether or not cannabidiol is or is not controlled, and it's not controlled. We know it's not controlled. So I do think it can justify being part of those discussions. I struggle to see if the way you are describing the document is true, and we have to say at the moment that we don't know.
Yeah.
But if you had that document and it said what you believe it says, and I've got no reason to believe that it won't, then I think you have a very valid point. With regard to ultra viris, I don't necessarily think that they have stepped outside of their power, because their role is to protect, and statutorily they have control over controlled cannabinoids. So they would have a responsibility to be involved. But I think if that was shown to be true, then they would be rightly criticised, and I think you probably result in an apology for the way something was handled. But I don't see you being able to show that they acted outside of their power.
Yeah, again, as stated before, this you know, the level of suspicion versus fact is always something that I'm keenly you know, focused on. But equally, there's you know, if those redactions were a little bit shorter or something, maybe I wouldn't have come to the same kind of suspicions. But
I think probably find, Kevin, that they'd say that it was a doctored photograph, doctored document. They were in Domino's Pizza with their daughter celebrating their birthday, and they didn't sweat overnight. I think that's probably what you would find.
Okay. Right. Okay. Now, where I want to kind of finish on there, on that area, before, if you're still happy to take a little bit more of a closer look at the MHRA's yellow card list, is whether or not that redacted area is Epidiolex. Now, if it is, then there might be a slight issue in the fact that it's not just a pharmaceutical product being judged against a food product. It's the fact that Epidiolex is made with sesame oil, and there's an Article 4 for MCT oil, which I believe, unless they do that with Sativex, GW/Jazz Pharmaceuticals don't actually touch on. Now, sesame oil kind of worries me, because when people talk about potential adverse reactions to CBD products, my first thoughts come to salicylate intolerance. Have you ever heard of that?
Yep.
Yeah, I, as it goes, my stepmother has a friend who asked me to look out for CBD products that might be salicylate free. I was unfortunately unsuccessful. But when we're kind of comparing apples and pears, and it comes to the difference in potentials of allergic reactions, surely that in itself is probably as bad a misrepresentation as the MHRA's yellow card list that we're going to touch on in a second.
Yeah, and I think for different reasons. So, rightly or wrongly, I've had a number of these OECD 408 studies across my desk, and I've had some presented by clients that were conducted overseas where they've used huge amounts of CBD. And interestingly, one of the trying to simplify this, but they're talking about the liver getting bigger. You have you basically got these spots that appear. Okay, so you've got these deposits within the liver causing this increase inside, and the GW and a lot of the regulators' conclusion is that's been caused by CBD. I've seen a huge amount of very detailed evidence which took further samples and conducted further investigations to demonstrate that in actual fact it was more likely the carrier oil from the rodent being force-fed very large amounts of the carrier oil that resulted in those adverse effects. Now that's something that we have presented to the FSA. The problem with a lot of these trials is they didn't keep free samples, or they didn't actually conduct those tests at the time, and they attributed some of the adverse effects. So I think you're quite right. If you think about force feeding a rodent, whether it be the GW trials or other trials, you can't force feed them CBD, so it's got to be in a carrier oil, and the volume of that oil going into the animal has an adverse effect of itself. So it's very easy to attribute adverse effects to CBD because I believe that's what they're looking for. And one of the biggest mistakes in science is to have a preconceived idea and then take the evidence to fit your theory. So what you're saying is very true. There's also the allergenicity issue, which you've touched upon. In fairness to novel foods, as part of the application, there should be allergenicity, which is why this whole process is so flawed with some of the consortium, because we're looking at the ingredient, which is what the novel food should be, but you need to look at the end matrix. So we've got CBD products that are mixed with other active ingredients. We've got other novel foods mixed in there, and there will be a difference. You know, you mentioned to me, Kevin, the pret-a-manger. You've got a situation where somebody could be putting an allergen into a product. That's basic food law, though. That's outside of novel foods. But it is without question that I have seen adverse effects, which I think are provable not to be as a result of cannabidiol, but as a result of the carrier.
And that leads us perfectly onto the yellow card list, which we've talked about this before. It actually kind of got promoted in the industry press, shall we say. Now, I've got it up in front of me right here.
Well, it got promoted in the industry press, Kevin, because in the November before the deadline of submitting the novel food dossiers, we conducted a study on the legality, the ethical justification, the moral justification of conducting animal trials, the OECD 408 industry-wide, apropos the available data from GW. And we made representations which were ignored, and then we sent an open letter finally to the Committee on Toxicity and to the Food Standards Agency, where we didn't cite officers. We got a very curt response back from Professor Alan Bubis, and he cited and produce that list to us.
Yes, and it's, shall we say, a rather intriguing list. I'm going to pull you straight away to the beginning. The first fatality registered in 2006, I believe it is. Now, I find it extremely weird that a fatality could be recorded on someone whose sex could not be determined, and in fact that's the same for 3 people in these studies. What's your thoughts on
now,
that?
though, would it, Kevin? That wouldn't be the case now.
No, I did try to think back to 2006 and thought, well, you know, the explosion of genders and pronouns and the likes of, maybe someone signed up to be part of a study and they were given the option of stating something else. But
I think they were run over by a steamroller, and they found a label for a CBD product in their pocket, and that was what was attributed as the cause of death by the MHRA.
But 2006, surely
You
there would
wouldn't
have
have had
only
a
been,
CBD.
yeah, there would have only been one about there, I think. And
Right.
the categories are really, really bizarre. Equally, there's some categories in there that raise questions in kind of the flip about. For example, psychiatric disorders. There are some reactions there, and you kind of think back to Reefer Madness, and you think, oh, all right, then fair enough. But we're talking CBD products. But now we're also seeing that GW have become the global sponsors of a trial involving Epidiolex for psychosis. And it's like, well, hold on. Would they be willingly going down that road if there was actually recorded reactions and, I think, a fatality on there?
But I think what we have in common with GW is they probably look at that list and treat it in the same way that we do. And I think it's not surprising, because it reminds me of the COVID statistics. So if you had COVID, yet a month later were knocked over by a bus or committed suicide, your death was attributed to COVID. So I think CBD taught them how to produce these statistics. I struggle to look at that list and find any justification whatsoever. I am embarrassed for the man for having provided it, but I think what it shows is a lack of understanding. Therefore, I feel more sorry for him than I feel.
I do feel that it shows something else as well, considering the categories that are on there. General disorders and administration site conditions. I mean, that's an interesting one in itself. Investigations, which is either on a dead body or part of a clinical trial. You would assume it would be the latter before becoming the former. What else have we got?
You know, it's a redacted list as well, Kevin.
Is it?
Yeah. So normally with that list, with the yellow card, there's an outcome. Yeah. So what happens is you've got that yellow card, you've got that event's recorded. You would normally bother to find out the sex of the person, and then there's a subsequent investigation, and then there's another column which I can't remember the letters, but anyway, basically it means attributed or not attributed. So you'll have an outcome. Strangely, that element of that document was never provided, nor have I been able to find it. So I think somewhere there sits a list where someone with a brain has looked at it and put, that's bollocks, that's bollocks, that's bollocks, that's bollocks. But it didn't serve their purpose, so somebody also got the guillotine and cut the end of it. But those are the decision makers.
It's funny because you wonder if that is possibly the only redacted document. You know, as the Article 4 that I talked about earlier with you is the only redacted determination in the EU database. Maybe there's some kind of connection.
I think. Well, you make public the information that you want to, don't you? And it goes down to the work on Epidiolex. It's not all in the public domain, which is why I said earlier about this yellow card. But it doesn't take a genius. I don't think you need an investigation. I don't think you actually need more than a cursory look to come to the conclusion that those entries on that list are not attributable to CBD, or that there are other candidates which are highly more likely to have caused that than CBD.
Definitely, definitely. And on that, sir, I think it's time to wrap up. Now, I have to thank you immensely, not just for jumping on here, but I feel on behalf of the industry, because we see collectively who asks questions and, shall we say, who doesn't. And that's where I think that there is a lot of love for the Canna-Consultants in the UK for the work you've done, as well as Matt, of course. And so for that, I think, yeah, I should thank you. And again, thank you for coming on. And on that, thank you very much for watching, folks. I've been Kevin Jones, and that is Steve Oliver. You can find contact details to the Canna-Consultants at the end of the video. Thanks very much. Take care.